All right, so we're going to go through your review problems. So please use this. Make sure that you're not only correcting the answers that I gave you, but that you're also correcting any incorrect work as we go along here. And I apologize, it's still going to be like mostly typing in kindergarten handwriting because my tablet, for some reason, is not working. So I'm going to have to reinstall the drivers. In number one, the mistake, as I kind of indicated before, the mistake is right here. It's in step 2 because you have 20x minus 7x. So these are on the same side of the equals. Those are like terms, so you just combine them how they are. You do not use opposite operations. So we're not adding 7 to both sides here. We're simply taking 20x minus 17x, which should be 13x. So as you were supposed to solve the equation with the correct solution, I just started mine at this line to do the correct work. So here I should have 13x minus 48 equals 5x. Oops, typed 5c, that won't work. So then in the next step, obviously, since their work was wrong, we're going to have to do our own work here. So in the next step, you should be subtracting the 13 on both sides because you only have constants on the left. So if you subtract the 5x, then suddenly you've moved everything to the same side. Remember that one of our major objectives is to get our variables on one side and our constants on the other. So we are going to subtract the 13x on both sides. Again, sorry, I'm the kindergarten handwriting. It's really hard without my special pen. So subtract 13x over here as well. And then in our next line, we can write what we get, which on the left side, I'm just going to have negative 48. And on the right side, 5x minus 13x is negative 8x. So then, obviously, our next step is to divide both sides by negative 8. When we do that, on the left side, we get 6. On the right side, we get x. And, of course, 6 equals x and x equals 6 are the same thing. Now, it does say that you have to justify each step. So this step over here where we made it the 13x, that justification is just combine like terms. That's all we did there. In the next step, when we subtracted the 13x, that would be subtraction, property of equality. And then finally, we used division, property of equality, when we divided both sides by negative 8. All right. Number 2, Jane has $7.50 to spend in the candy store. She likes lollipops and gumballs. Each lollipop costs $2.75 and each gumball costs 50 cents. Jane buys 1 lollipop. Write an equation that represents this situation. So first of all, it's very key that it says equation. That means it should have an equal sign. So we know she's buying 1 lollipop and we know that those cost $2.75. So I put that cost in first. Then we are also buying gumballs, but we don't know how many. So the cost of gumballs is going to be however much 1 gumball costs, which is 50 cents, multiplied times the number of gumballs, which we don't know, so we'll let that be G. And then we know that she has $7.50 to spend. So this is our equation, and it said to tell what your variable represents. So we're going to let G equal the number of gumballs. It asks what the greatest number of gumballs that Jane can buy is. So this just means that we need to solve the equation that we wrote in A. So our first step is going to be, and maybe I'll use a different color here so it stands out, but if I work right underneath here, I'm going to first just subtract 275 from both sides, not 275, 2.75. And then that's going to give me, in my next step, 0.5g equals, and then when I do 750 and I take away the 275 from that 750, that's going to give me 475. Why is it not typing? There we go, 475. So then our next step would be to divide both sides by 0.5 or to multiply both sides by 2. Those are the same thing, so it does not matter which way you write it. I think that most people probably would write it as dividing by 0.5 since it's a decimal and not a fraction. Remember, we are only allowed to use decimal here because it's a real life situation and because there were decimals in the original problem. So when I divide those out, then I find that the value for G is 9.5. Now, that's the solution to the equation. What it asks is the greatest number of gumballs that she can buy. So we have to interpret it for the real life situation. Since she can't buy a half of a gumball, we say that Jane can buy 9 gumballs. All right, number 3, very straightforward, just an equation that we need to solve. So remember that our first step anytime we are solving an equation is to simplify the individual sides of the equal sign first. So the first thing I'm going to do is simplify over here on the left side. So that means I need to distribute this -6. And so in my next step, the 12 is going to stay because I haven't done anything with it yet. -6 times W is -6W. -6 times -3 is positive 18. So that's what I end up with on the left side in my first step. Then I also need to distribute over here on the right side. I've got 3 that needs multiplied times both of these that are in parentheses. So 3 times -5 gives me -15. 3 times -3W gives me -9W. And then I still have my plus 21 that's on the end there. So my left and right sides are still not completely simplified because I have like terms that I need to combine. So I've got 12 and 18 on the left side of the equation that need to be combined. And then on the right side of the equation, I've got -15 and positive 21. So that's going to be my next step, is I'm going to actually combine those like terms. So the 12 plus the 18 gives me 30. So I've got 30 minus 6W on the left, and then on the right side, -15 plus 21 gives me a positive 6, so I have 6 minus 9W. So now the next general step, because I've finished the first thing, both individual sides are as simplified as they can be. My next step then is going to be to get all my variables on one side and all my numbers on the other. So I chose to move this 6W by adding it. So I'm going to add 6W to both sides here. When I do that, that means that in my next step, and I'm going to type it up here, I'm going to have just 30 on the left side, and that's going to be equal to 6 minus 3W, because -9 plus 6 is -3. So that's what I have in my next step. Now be careful here. Here is where I see a lot of you then trying to subtract the 30. Don't do that. Keep in mind our goal. Our goal is to get that variable, the W, by itself. So I don't need to move the 30. That's moving things closer. It's moving things to the same side. What I need to do is move the 6, so that way I'm closer to getting my W alone. So when I do that, then that's going to give me 24 on the left side and -3W on the right. Final step then is to divide both sides by -3, which is going to give me -8 equal to my W, which is the solution I had listed. All right, number 4, it's an inequality. Remember that inequalities have the same general steps as equations. So the first thing I need to do here is simplify my left side by distributing. Remember that your calculator can do fractions for you. You hit alpha and then y equals, and you can actually type in a fraction. So there's that. Remember, if you have the older calculator, that you have to use the parenthesis buttons and the division key between, but you can still do fractions in either form of the calculator. So when I distribute that, I get 4 minus 1/6 p. Sorry, I'm going to have to type it out here instead of drawing it, but that means 1/6. And then negative 1/6 times negative 3 gives me a positive 1/2. So sorry about the notation. If my pen were working, it would be much better. And then we have greater than 7. So I'm still not done simplifying on the left. I've got like terms. So I need to combine this 4 with this positive 1/2. Because those are both plain numbers. Remember, you can use your calculator. It's okay if you have trouble adding the fractions. Use your calculator and then do math choice 1 to make it a fraction. So you'll see when you hit 9 plus 1/2, or 9 plus 1/2, 4 plus 1/2, the answer is 9/2, which is why I said 9 just a second ago. And so then I've got 9/2 minus 1/6 p is greater than 7 for my next step. So I want to get p alone, so the next thing I need to do is to move this 9/2 to the other side. So I'll do that by subtracting. So subtract 9/2 on both ends. So sorry about this writing. So on the left side, those are going to cancel, and I'm just going to end up with my negative 1/6 p. On the right side, I've got 7 minus 9 over 2, which gives me 5 over 2. Again, you can use the calculator for that. So now, 2 different ways to do the next step. I personally would multiply by the reciprocal, so I would multiply both sides by -6 here, because that's how I usually get rid of fractions. You could also, if you're using your calculator, do divided by -1/6. That's the same as multiplying by -6. So either of those in your work is okay. That's going to give us p alone. We multiplied by a negative number, so that means we need to flip the symbol. And then 5/2 times -6 gives us -15. So p is less than -15 for our solution there. Number 5, Tasty Yogurt Manufacturing Company makes 10 cents per container of plain yogurt, 12 cents per container of vanilla. They want to make a profit of at least $3,200. Tasty expects to sell at least 12,000 cups of plain yogurt, which is represented by P, but no more than 15,000 cups of vanilla, which is V. Which of the following inequalities represents this situation? Select all that apply. So, obviously you know the answers that I selected, which are B, whoa, sorry, it's still on text, B, and then also C, and then E. Now, I'm going to explain why all of these work. V just stands for the number of cups of vanilla yogurt. It said in the directions no more than 15,000. So that's exactly where E came from. It also says at least 12,000 cups of plain yogurt, which is P. At least does mean greater than or equal to. This last one is an inequality that represents it because we take 10 cents that they make per cup, multiply it times the number of cups of plain, and that's going to be the money they make off of plain. This part right over here is the money that they make off of vanilla because they make 12 cents per cup. We would multiply that times how many cups they sell. So plain money plus vanilla money is going to be greater than or equal to 3,200 because that's the profit that they want to make at least. The other ones, they didn't count for the decimal points here, and here it was at least, which means bigger. Part B, if Tasty sold exactly 15,000 cups of vanilla yogurt, how many cups of plain would they need to sell to meet their profit goal? So they're giving us a value for V, so that means that we need to plug that into this inequality from part B. So I don't know P right now, and that's what I'm trying to figure out, because that's what it asks, how many cups of plain yogurt. So I've got 0.10P, and then I've got plus 0.12 times V. They just told me that V was going to be 15,000. So I'm going to plug that in, and I need that to be greater than or equal to 3,200. I have to handwrite the equal sign because it doesn't come out on my typing here. So that's all I'm doing, is I'm going to be solving this for my P. So first thing I need to do is multiply the 0.12 times the 15,000, which then in the next step I'm going to have 0.10P plus 1,800, which is what I get, is greater than or equal to 3,200. Next, I'm trying to solve for P, so I'm trying to get it alone. So the next thing I need to do is to subtract the 1,800 on both sides. So subtract 1,800 on the left, and then do the same thing on the right side. So when I do that, that means all I have on the left is the 0.1P. On the right side, then 3,200 minus 1,800 gives me 1,400. So 1,400. Final step then is going to be to divide both sides by 0.1. That'll get my P alone. And put my equal back in there, which then gives me P is greater than or equal to, and that's going to be 14,000. I don't know why I'm using the writing when I could type. So greater than or equal to 14,000. And so then that means that to answer the question, we would say at least 14,000 cups. So that would be the final answer that I wrote on the board. Page 2, solving a formula for a specified variable. So here, basically, they're having you solve for various variables. So both of these have B1 on the left side. So to see if those are right, what we should do, it does say show work, is solve this formula for B1. Now, B1 is in parentheses, which means you have to get rid of what's outside the parentheses first if you're solving for that. So I'm going to put the work over here. So what I would do first is I would get rid of the 1/2 by multiplying both sides by 2. So that would give me 2A on the left side. And then on the right side, the 1/2 and the 2 cancel, so I would have H times the quantity B1 plus B2. Sorry, I can't make the 1 and the 2 small on this. So again, I'm trying to get B1 alone, so I got to get rid of this H because it's multiplied first. So the next thing I would do is divide both sides by H. Sorry about the writing again. Now, on the right side, those are going to cancel. And so I just have the B1 plus B2. On the left side, 2A divided by H does not simplify. So it's just going to stay 2A in the top, and it'll be H in the denominator. And I've got that equal now to B1 plus B2. Let me draw in my over H. And so then final step to get B1 alone would be to subtract B2 on both sides. Again, B2 is not a like term with what I already have over here. So they can't be combined. So I just end up with 2A over H and then minus my B2, which this doesn't match A or B. So that means neither of those is correct. Now, when I go to look at B2, don't worry, I don't have to redo all that work that I just did. If you look back to this step where I had 2A over H equals B1 plus B2, I can start right from there, because all I would do to get B2 alone instead of B1 is subtract B1 on both sides instead of B2. So the only difference between what I got here for B1 and B2 is what's here. So B2 solved for would be 2a over h minus B1, which is what I have in C. So C is the correct solution. Now I need to look at D and E, which are solved for h. So if I want to get h alone, depending on which order you're going to do that in, one way is to get rid of the 1/2 first by multiplying by 2, so just like I did in the last one. So if I multiply by 2, I get 2a on the left, and then I get h, b1 plus b2 on the right. Now, if I'm solving for h, then that means I can just divide by b1 plus b2. Notice that when I divide by that, I get exactly what's over here. 2a divided by b1 plus b2. So D is definitely a correct option here. Now, I need to look at E, because E is also a solution. It's just representing starting at a different place than we did here. What they did here is the first thing they did to get h alone was divide by b1 plus b2. So if you did that, your first step would look like this. It would have a in the numerator, and then it would have b1 plus b2 in the denominator, and then that would be equal to the 1/2 times h. I don't know why I typed plus instead of equals. There we go. So this is also a correct first step. And so if you did it this way, then some people would say, oh, well then I need to multiply both sides by 2. Well, having a 2 in the numerator is the same as having a 1/2 in the denominator. So E is also a correct solution. All right, number 7, about our friend Bobby collecting plastic drink bottles and cans. It says the depot's paying him 5 cents per can and 10 cents for a plastic bottle. If he raised over $80, what is the minimum number of plastic bottles he collected if he only collected 480 cans? It says to show your work. So I wrote an inequality because it said minimum, but you can also use an equation here. That would be acceptable. We know how many cans he has, and we know how much he's paid for them. So the first thing I did was I did the 5 cents per can, and I multiplied it by the cans that he collected. So I know he's earning money from that. Then he's also going to be earning money for the bottles, but the number of bottles is what we don't know. That's our variable. So I made that B for bottle. And then we know that that total amount of money, he raised over $80. So we know that that's going to be greater than or equal to 560. And so then I just solved this inequality. 5 cents times 480 gives you 24. So then I've got 24 plus 0.1b is greater than 560. Then I subtracted the 24 on both sides. So minus 24, minus 24. And then that gave me 0.1b is greater than oh goodness, I've made a mistake. I'm looking at my work. I'm like, this isn't right. What am I doing? It's greater than the amount of money that he makes, which is 80. Sorry about that. Good thing I caught that. That would have been a disaster. I wondered why my number was so big in the next step. I was like, that doesn't make sense. So 80 minus 24, not 560 minus 24, gives you 56. So then I divided both sides by 0.1, and I find B is greater than 560, which is why I wrote 560, because I just looked down and that is my answer. So 560 bottles is the minimum that he can collect there in order to make that $80 or more. Okay, number 8, the problem with the taxi driver here. It's really important anytime you have word problems to make sure that you're paying attention to how they define the variables. So here it says the variable P represents how many people are in the taxi. Then it also tells you up here that X stands for number of miles driven. So it wants to know if 2 people will be riding in the taxi, what would the first step in solving the linear equation for the cost of 1 person be? So if there are 2 people riding in the taxi, then that means that you'd be putting in 2 in place of P. X doesn't really matter here because that's the number of miles. Y is the cost per person. So if we want to find Y, and I've just put in a 2 in place of P, that is why the correct answer here is C, because in order to get the Y alone, I'd have to get rid of the value of P that I just plugged in, which was 2. So the correct answer here is C, dividing both sides by 2 because we're cutting the cost in half. Now, if 2 people are in the taxi for 12 miles, how much will each person pay the taxi driver? Now, this one, you need to explain and show work here. So if I take the numbers that they gave me, which are 2 for the number of people, so I put 2 in for P, and then it says 12 miles. Remember that miles is X, so I'm plugging in 12 where X was. Everything else about my equation stays the same. That gives me 2Y equals 4 times 12 plus 10. Remember that Y is the cost per person. So if I simplify on the right side, it's all numbers over there. So I just do the 4 times 12 to get 48 plus the 10, which gives me then 58. So I get 2Y equals 58. If we divide both sides by 2, then 58 divided by 2 is going to give me 29. So Y equals 29. And then it asks how much will each person pay the taxi driver. So I would say $29. And for the explanation, I would just say you need to get Y by itself, plugging in 2 for P and 12 for X. So that would be my explanation there. Number 9, a bus traveling from Philadelphia to Boston travels at an average speed of 55 miles per hour. The bus stops for 1 hour halfway between Philadelphia and Boston. Write an equation that can be used to find the time in hours T it will take the bus to reach Boston if the distance between Philadelphia and Boston is 310 miles. So one thing that you discussed in junior high, very important, just general math knowledge, is the formula that rate times time equals distance. So this is what we're using in this problem. But here's the trick, because I saw, as I was going around to stamp people's stuff, that a lot of you had the right idea as far as rate times time equals distance went, but you just did 55t equals 310. The tricky part of this question is the fact that it says the bus stops for 1 hour. So that means that the time that you actually are spending, the actual travel time is going to be 1 hour less than that. So when I wrote my answer on the board, you'll notice as you look at it, because I'm going to type it again here, it was 55 times t minus 1 equals 310. So the reason why this says t minus 1 is because if it were just t, that would just be the number of hours that it would take you to get there. Because they're stopping for an hour, you have to add that time, so we subtract it in the rate. So this is the equation that you should use here. Now, if you had something equivalent, that would be fine. So I saw some people, one equivalent would be just the 55t minus 55 equals 310. So that would be fine if you had that. It would also be fine, I did see this one, some people that had 55t equals, and then they added the 55 to the other side and got 365. So if you had one of these, that would be what I mean by or equivalent. So that would be fine. Excuse me. So part B, solve your equation from part A, show your work. So actually these or equivalent are steps in the process to solving, because the first thing that we would do when solving this is distribute the 55, which would give us this step right here. The next thing that we would do would be to add 55 to both sides, which gives us this 55t equals 365. So really the only thing I still have left to do in my work is to divide both sides by the 55. So take your 365 and divide it by 55, and that's where I got, and notice I used approximately symbol. I can't type that here, but you get t equals 6.63636, so on and so forth. So I just rounded it. I said approximately 6.6, and then how long it will take. It will take the bus about 6.6 or 6.5 hours to reach Boston. All right, almost there. Number 10, Bobby has a sister named Abby. Bobby's sister is 4 years older than 1/3 of Bobby's age. Write an expression that represents Abby's age using B to represent Bobby's age. Here's something that's really important that I've said a bunch of times, but people are still messing up, so I want to point it out again on the video. When it says write an expression, that means numbers and variables. No equal sign, no greater than sign, just numbers and variables. Here it tells us to use B to represent Bobby's age. So it says Abby is 4 years older, so we know we're going to be adding to Bobby's, something with Bobby, so add 4. Then 1/3 of Bobby's age, so it's not just B plus 4, it's 1/3 of Bobby's age, and of, remember, means to multiply here. So this is 1/3 B plus 4 should be your expression. Do not put an equal sign. No equals. How old is Bobby if Abby is 7 years old? So it just said to show your work, so you don't have to set up an equation. What I did was I just said that 1/3 B plus 4 had to equal 7. Now, you didn't have to set it up this way because it didn't specifically ask for an equation. So if you just wrote 7 minus 4 equals 3 and then times 3, that's perfectly fine. So to solve this, I would subtract 4 on both sides first, which is going to give me 1/3 B equals 3. Then to get rid of fractions, we multiply by the reciprocal, so I would then multiply both sides by 3, which would give me B equals 9. So how old is Bobby? Bobby is 9 years old. Number 11, Jane set up a lemonade stand to sell lemonade. The total cost of making the lemonade was $1.50. So she must not have made very much. She sold each cup of lemonade for 25 cents. Write and solve an equation that can be used to find the total number of cups X Jane must sell to make a profit of $9.75. So earlier in this unit, we talked about profit in terms of revenue and expenses. So I gave you that hint here. Profit equals the total money that you make, which is revenue, minus your expenses or cost. So to write an equation that represents this, the profit that we want is $9.75. So it says profit equals. So we're going to type $9.75 has to equal the total money that she makes. Now the money that she makes is 25 cents for each cup. So I do 25 cents times X, because X is the number of cups. So 0.25x represents the total money made, or the revenue. Then I have to subtract out the money that she had to spend, or the expenses, which is $1.50. So here's writing the equation. To solve the equation, the first thing that I need to do is to add $1.50 to both sides. So plus $1.50 And then same thing on the other side, plus 150. So then on the left side, 975 plus 150 is going to give me 1125, and that's going to be equal to 0.25x. So final step then is to divide both sides by 0.25, which gives me x equals 45. So 45 cups is the answer there. 12, solve and graph the solution set to the inequality. So this is just a single inequality. Remember, we treat them just like equations except for two things. Number one, if you multiply or divide by a negative, you have to flip the symbol. Number two, if you switch the variable from the right side to the left side, you have to flip the symbol. So in this case, my variable's on the left, and the left side is already as simplified as it can go. So that means my first step is going to be to get rid of that 10 by subtracting. Whatever I do on one side, I also have to do on the other. So subtract 10 over here on the right as well. So that means that these are going to cancel each other out. So on my left side, I now, in my next step, have just 4x on the left. I have my less than symbol. 6 minus 10 is negative 4. So that's my right side. Next, I'm still trying to get x alone. So that means the next thing that I would do is divide both sides by 4. Whoa, that's extra special kindergarten handwriting. Sorry, guys. So divide by 4. So on the left side, that cancels out, which means x is going to be alone. So I've got x is less than negative 4 divided by 4 is negative 1. Now notice I did not flip the symbol because the number I divided by was positive. So this is the solution. Then it asked me to graph the solution. So draw yourself a number line. Remember that I only require 2 numbers. If you want to draw more, you can. Just make sure you space them correctly. So negative 1 and 0 are the two that I'm going to require that you have. The boundary value in this case should get an open circle. Remember, it's open circles when there's no equal sign under the symbol. Closed circle if there is an equals underneath. Then I have to shade. This is a less than symbol, so I shade to the left. Make sure that your shading includes the arrow. You do need to go over top of the arrow to indicate that. All right, 13. Meg converted $100 to francs, and then she converted francs to pounds. In the end, she had 100 FP pounds, where F is the number of francs per dollar, P is the number of pounds per franc. What does FP represent? So if you write it out, this is just what I did. I did 100, and then I, instead of F, did francs per dollar, so I did F over D. You don't have to do it this way. Some of you may just know the answer, and that's great. P, since P represented pounds per franc, I put P over F because of that word per means to divide. So when you write it like this, you can see that what's going to happen is these F's are going to cancel each other out, because one was in the numerator and one was in the denominator. So this part that originally was just represented by FP, I now have P over D, which P was representing pounds, D was representing dollars. So it's representing the number of pounds per dollar, which is C. Again, if you just knew that, that's great. Last one, yay! Solve for x if the perimeter is 26. So perimeter means add up all the sides. So x plus 3 is my first side, plus second side, which is 4x, plus 8, which is my third side. I need to set that equal to 26. In order to solve this equation, the first thing I should do is be combining like terms. So these are like terms, x and 4x. That gives me a total of 5x. Notice I'm not using opposite operations. These are on the same side of the equal sign. So I combine them just to how they are. Then I also have like terms here, the plain 3 and the 8 that are on the same side. So 3 plus 8 is 11. and then of course that equals 26. So now I'm going to stop using the kindergarten handwriting in a second. To get x alone, subtract 11 first, minus 11, and then that gives me in my next step 5x is alone on the left side, and then 26 minus 11 is 15. So 5x equals 15, divide by 5, and x equals 3. And that's what it asked me to do, was to solve for x. All right, so that should cover everything. Make sure you get all of your work corrected, not just the answers. And I will see you tomorrow.